This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. Welcome back to Coronial, everyone. I'm Georgie.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Emma.
And this week we're going to bring you another compilation episode, which I'm pretty excited about. So today I'm going to be telling you guys about the death of Willem Lambertus van der Pasch. And this inquest was completed by the New Zealand coroner in 2013 in conjunction with 4 other quad bike accidents and released to provide recommendations for their use and regulations to prevent accidental death and injury in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. So I'm presenting just this one out of the 5 accidents. However, the recommendations that occur in this inquest are in relation to all of the 5, but still fairly relevant to this one that I've picked. And all will be linked in the episode should you want to do any further reading. Sorry for the potential homework. So Willem van der Pasch was a 57-year-old experienced farmer when he accidentally rolled his quad bike whilst out feeding animals on September 2nd of 2011. He was considered to be of reasonable health, and his usual daily routine included using a quad bike extensively to assist with farming responsibilities. He and his wife lived in Otauranga, which is 2 hours south of Auckland, of the North Island of New Zealand. Willem usually placed his feed out for their farm stock over the course of an hour of each morning. He did this by hitching a purpose-built trailer to the quad bike and then loading feed onto the trailer and setting off. So he did live with his wife, and she set off for work early in the mornings before he began this routine. And on this particular day, she arrived home around 4 p.m. and noted that the mail had not been brought in. Willem had not eaten lunch and that their dog remained inside, which was unusual given their dog normally accompanied Willem with farm chores.
Yep.
So Mrs. van der Pasch went to look for her husband, given she was worried about where he was. And as she approached the path where he drove the quad bike, she could see the quad bike was on its side, with the trailer still attached. The quad bike remained positioned on Willem. So she phoned the emergency services, and the first team to arrive was the fire service.
So, how was it on him?
I will detail that a little bit more.
Okay.
But so she essentially found Willem pinned under the bike. We could see part of his body, but not a whole lot of him exposed.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so she knew it was an emergency. She actually couldn't get reception where he was, so she had to go get some reception, make some calls, get some emergency services. And the first people to arrive were the fire service. And the firefighter stated that when he was approaching the quad bike, he found it upside down on Willem with Willem underneath the trailer. So he was kind of underneath both portions of the quad bike and the trailer. The trailer and the bike were lifted off of Willem, but it was evident that he was deceased at this point and had been for some time.
Right.
So probably this had occurred early in the day of his farm chores. So Willem's wife stated she assumed Willem had had his accident on the return from feeding the bulls early into his chores run for the day, or the feeding run. The accident occurred on a dry day with fine weather. The path was considered reasonable and flat, but it appeared that Willem had collided with a nearby fence post, causing the quad bike to ride up the post and then tip onto its side.
Oh, okay.
Of note, Willem was not wearing a helmet whilst riding the quad bike.
Did they say anywhere about whether he would have survived if he was wearing a helmet?
No, it wasn't talked about whether there would have been any survival had he been, but the coroner does touch on helmets, and I'll go into that. I think probably based on this story, and I am just making some wild assumptions here, but I would have assumed the time frame between him having the accident and him being discovered by his wife across the day, even if he'd been wearing a helmet, potentially that time would have been the factor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But again, you can't actually determine that.
Mm-hmm.
And, he was otherwise well. It wasn't like he was on drugs or drunk or anything like that in terms of his autopsy findings. So the main recommendations provided by the coroner were, as I said, around all of the 5 inquests, and it broken down into some themes of the sale of quad bikes, the experience of riders, safety equipment, and the aftermarket products such as the trailer. So the primary sale of quad bikes in New Zealand actually is pretty well regulated if your sale occurs through a distributor, because often when you buy it from a distributor, you are provided with active riding education about the operation of the particular bike, its capabilities, and the new owner should, by these distributors, be encouraged to wear a helmet whilst riding.
Do we know what Willem's experience was with quad bikes?
He was a very experienced quad bike rider. He had been a farm owner for many years and did an hour's worth of farm chores on the bikes every single day.
Right.
So very, very experienced.
Okay.
And then when you buy a quad bike as well in New Zealand from a distributor, they should also potentially be following up after you've bought it to check how comfortable you are with it over that first period of buying it. But this initial sale doesn't account for then subsequent sales when you buy second-hand quad bikes and might be the second, third, 20th owner in terms of that education and experience that you get when you first buy it. And so Corona was really highlighting that excellent regulation that they have of that initial setup is great when you're buying a brand new quad bike, but in reality people aren't buying brand new quad bikes all the time, and that's going to therefore reduce that experience and understanding and education level for any subsequent owners. It wasn't mentioned in this inquest whether he had bought this new or second hand, so it was hard to therefore assess how much education he'd had around it, other than us talking about, yes, he in fact was an experienced rider. But in terms of the bike itself, it was found to have an incorrectly oversized tyres fitted, and then one of which was not inflated to the recommended pressure. So in terms of upkeep and that kind of thing, it wasn't in the best shape.
Did they suggest how old the quad bike was?
Nah, they didn't talk about that either.
Okay.
So mine's not super exciting from that perspective.
No, that's all right.
And then the rear disc brakes were also not to the recommended specifications. And the rear carrier extension where the trailer was attached had been modified since the initial sale of the bike.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So it was custom fit. These issues are of significant importance as the quad bike is known to have a high centre of gravity with a short and narrow wheelbase, which requires accurate tyre pressures and levels to maintain stability. And furthermore, they require a high level of maintenance to ensure their safety and efficiency. And so by finding even these minor issues meant that this quad bike was potentially at a higher risk of having an accident, no matter who was riding it. So in relation to the sale and maintenance of quad bikes in New Zealand, the coroner made the following recommendations. And whilst it hasn't been mentioned previously, the coroner did recommend that quad bikes should not be referred to as all-terrain vehicles, because in the coroner's view this is misleading and should be removed from the terminology in relation to quad bikes so that they are not, thought to be suitable for purchase for a number of different scenarios. They should be purchased for specific scenarios that are in fact what a quad bike should be used for. So another recommendation was to give thought to a better message about quad bike maintenance, in particular having the correct tyre pressure and then general maintenance of the quad bike to reduce potential fatalities through those minor issues, being actually really significant contributors to the stability of the vehicle. And then lastly, the coroner said, in an ideal world, having quad bikes either registered or licensed may be of real benefit as a way to regulate the maintenance on those quad bikes to reduce them being a negative contributor. But is that a negative of that's going to be really hard to do?
I was going to say,
is
that's
that
just,
overstepping?
It's red tape. It just
Yeah.
sounds like red tape to me.
Yeah.
Making things harder.
And so it's hard to know, is that regulation going to be a positive effect, or is it just that negative effect of more red tape?
And who would be policing it? Who's going to go onto people's farm properties and
check these things?
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it just make it a complex process without actually having that benefit?
That's right. It's not like, having to register your vehicle because that's on public property, which is fair enough and it can be easily regulated.
If you're on a private property, that's really your own
responsibility
and risk to accept. So in terms of the rider's experience, the coroner mentioned active riding and rider training was identified as an essential part of the safe operation of a quad bike. And as we talked about, Willem was very experienced. And so from that perspective, it's thought to have not been a contributor to the accident. in context of that, the bike was then found to be in a low gear, which indicated that Willem was travelling at a fairly low speed at the time as well. So it doesn't sound like he was doing anything risky or dangerous or making poor decisions or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And so it was suggested the most likely reason that he tipped was that he veered off the left of the usual path that he took, probably just got distracted looking at something, and then struck this fence pole, which caused him to then ride it up and tip. And that's how sort of easily that can happen with a quad bike.
Yeah, I was about to say, that seems so, like, crazy that can cause a quad bike to tip just running into a fence post.
Yeah, and I guess just because they've got that ability, because they're all-terrain, to just keep going
up.
Yeah, you don't run into it and stop. You run into it and
crash,
start going up and then tip.
And just that momentary inattentiveness.
Yeah.
Leading to such a tragedy versus, I guess, a lot of other vehicles you drive.
Yeah, the same thing kind of happens.
You can still have the same outcome, but the quad bikes specifically being one that has been quite
They've been an issue for years and years and years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So in relation to public safety, the coroner made the following recommendations. To support the production of guidelines for the safe use of quad bikes by a governing body, that the rider must be trained and have a requisite experience to ride a quad bike in performing their duties and functions, including ensuring that proper judgment is exercised choosing the right vehicle for the right job. So again, I think that this is going to be hard to really control or regulate. Mm-hmm. But I guess it's the coroner putting it out there that we should at least have some guidelines and some information out there and education out there that people should be thinking this through. So, could an agriculture governing body be trying to push these messages out there to try to get that safety? And then consider things like continuing education and training for quad bike owners to continue that understanding of how to safely do things. Because I think, there's always that risk that I've done this forever. So those judgment skills relax a little bit.
But, I still wonder how all of those recommendations or implementations, if they do go ahead, would actually have helped Willem in this situation where he just momentary lapse of concentration. Like, you can be trained on how to not do everything.
That. Train that you have to be really cautious all of the time that you're on there.
Yeah, but I feel like just as humans, we just, unfortunately, if you're doing something for more than, 10 minutes, you're going to have a wandering thought or something's going to distract you.
True. And I mean, also the coroner said that, unfortunately, training and education cannot teach common sense or good judgment. Nevertheless, they can teach the realities of poor decisions when quad bikes are placed in vulnerable situations as a result of riding them on hilly, sloped or steep terrain. And death and injury can occur in slow motion as well as fast or when turning.
Yeah.
So, but look, you're right in terms of duration may affect your concentration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even with all the education in the world, you might have not had great judgment at the time of the activity that you're doing.
I mean, we see that all the time in the amount of road fatalities we have.
Yeah.
Like, people are always told, do not drive more than 2 hours without a break.
Oh, yeah, no, I've done that many times.
Case in point. And then the number of accidents you see, fatalities, where they're like, driver fatigue was an issue.
Yeah, fair. Oh, yeah, all of my drives home from night shift.
Yeah. Sometimes when you drive home late, right, and you're like, I don't know if I really should be driving
right
now.
You get home and you think back, like, I don't actually remember any of that drive.
How did I get here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I've definitely had that a lot. Mm-hmm. So as you mentioned, Emma, safety equipment, it's controversial in New Zealand about the need for helmets when riding a quad bike.
That's interesting.
What?
The perspective on helmets in New Zealand for quad bikes.
Yeah, so it's only been since 2011, which is around the time that this accident happened, that there was the initiation of quad bike harm reduction project, which was around the encouragement of wearing helmets.
Yep.
That everyone who uses them should be trained and experienced to do the work that they're doing on a quad bike, that the right vehicle is used for the right job, and that children should not be riding on adult quad bikes.
Yep.
Were kind of the main points of that harm reduction project. And so one of the successful outcomes of that had been increased use of helmets. But I mean, even in Willem's case, he wasn't wearing one because you're on a farm, you're going slow, you don't expect to need it because, well, I don't know, I find it hard. Like, I find often helmets are sort of, but that's when you're at like high speeds and so they're to protect, but then you also are recommended to wear one on push bikes. So it's
That's
also
right.
slow motion with hard impact can still,
Yeah, that's right.
Need a
Slow
helmet.
motion plus gravity can sometimes be enough to...
do significant damage.
Yeah.
So along with helmets, the commonly debated safety equipment for quad bikes is also the installation of a rollover protection device. So a rollover cage kind of situation. The benefits of these being that the rider wouldn't be crushed by the weight of the vehicle, as what we saw in Willem's case. But there's been arguments that these devices could actually increase the chances of injury, and that's what's prevented them from actually being regulated as requirements in New Zealand, because industry bodies have said, but if you roll over, you could get a limb pinned, and that could be worse, or I don't know, getting crushed under there seems
I
pretty
would
bad.
prefer, not to get crushed.
Yeah.
But they've also argued that the addition of it could make them a more unstable vehicle as well,
That's
which
the
also
issue.
Make them more
Potentially.
top heavy.
so increase their risk of tipping. The coroner essentially said, well, we have seen endorsement of these in Australia, so that's an example of a place where there is a recommendation for the use of those, and that given there's these arguments about how safe versus risky they could be, the further research needs to be done in this area to definitively tell us what is the safer option, yes or no to roll cage. And so basically saying that a specialist quad bike unit should be established for pursuing further research in this, and that in New Zealand they have the Accident Compensation Corporation, which is kind of the equivalent of Australia's work cover, and that they should be funded to continue research in this area, given a lot of these accidents are on farms when people are performing work duties. The other thing that the coroner mentioned was to consider fitting a warning signal by the way of a beeper or alarm when a quad bike is in reverse or at the risk of tipping when it's on a slope or something like that, such as just like a warning system for the rider. I guess you could lead on from there of like, oh, is there a way that you could start researching into other types of warning systems that are going to alert others?
I was thinking of, I was just thinking of even like an in car. I know this, of course, happened in 2011, so technology was a little bit
Different.
less progressed at that point. But even in your cars now, how you have like anti-collision
Sensors and stuff like
and
that.
things like that. Like if you're going to run into something that looks like a pole or something, whether it can alert the driver beforehand to be like, hey, you're about to run into this. Is this really what you want to do?
Well, I'm actually thinking back to last week where they were talking about with the drag races, if the kids weren't obeying the speed limit, that the consideration of installation of some sort of cut-off system so that they could remote do it. Or is there a remote access option of like, if it does tip, the bike knows that and it sends a sensor to
Someone
the
else.
buddy
Yeah.
that, therefore knows that the bike has tipped over, because he was laying there for how many hours?
Yeah.
But I guess
Either
what
way,
could
it
the wife
wouldn't
what could the wife have done
yeah.
if she had been notified while she was at work? And then I guess what's the negative impact of that if that happens? But he's totally fine. He gets up and he continues on with his day, and she's freaking out that he's pinned under the quad bike. So
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I
like,
think still the benefit outweighs the risk there.
but it depends on how many
Well,
times a
true.
day you're tipping your quad bike.
Hopefully
not
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
all, but
But if false alarms, then it could become like a cried wolf
Yeah.
situation where
yeah.
people get annoyed by the thing rather than it being a benefit.
Yeah.
So finally, the coroner will discuss the aftermarket products. So talking about the trailer that was attached. And this was a common theme amongst all of those 5 that were involved in this one inquest, that they all had some sort of aftermarket product fitted, such as spray units for farms or trailers. So these products are designed to attach to the quad bike, but not fitted during the initial sale of the bike itself. And it may not necessarily have been designed by the manufacturer. Willem's trailer was an example of this. It was a steel gill trap single axle trailer. Hope that means something to some people. It means nothing to me. But attached to the rear of the quad bike. It was loaded with 12 bales of hay, which combined to a total weight of 180 kilos.
Oh, wow.
And the trailer itself weighed 180 kilos, which means that he was towing 364 kilos of weight behind his quad bike.
Did they
At the
have
time.
a towing capacity for the quad bike?
This was the maximum load of the towing capacity for the bike. Now, I did not know that quad bikes towed that kind of
No,
that
neither
much.
did I.
Level
That's
of-
a lot.
of weight, and I'm thinking about, holy crap, yeah, no wonder he couldn't get up or out from the quad bike in the trailer because it was 180 kilos. So I guess they didn't then go on to like how much this contributed towards his death, which I would have liked to have seen some more information around how easy it is to tip a bike with a trailer attached or not. Does it make it more stable, less stable, anything
Yeah.
like that? But I guess that seems like a lot of weight to be towing. Like, can you imagine if you got on a hill and something happened, it's going to push you down further and quicker and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that, a lot more does need to be done into that research of that area in terms of if we don't know how safe these attachments are, then we should be looking into what risks they're posing to farmers as well.
Yeah.
Because they're sold. People are like, yeah, that makes my job easier. But, yeah, where's that line of job easier but also such a higher risk? The coroner's formal recommendation was that regular testing of aftermarket attachments and products associated with quad bikes should occur to provide better information around the risk and compromise in relation to the stability issues of the quad bike and provide a better understanding of the limitations arising from. So that was Willem's case. I think for me, this is just like easing into the dangers of a quad bike. This one didn't really have much going on other than he just tipped over, and that can be so, so dangerous. And so highlight some of those beginning concerns around a quad bike as well.
For sure. Dangerous vehicles, if they're not used correctly.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
that seems to be a narrow margin
Yeah,
for using it correctly.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of give.
No. Doesn't sound like it.
Okay, so going into our second quad bike case. Miley Maxwell was 6 years old when she died while riding on an adult-sized quad bike.
Oh, yeah. Relevance.
Yeah.
And this happened on a family friend's property near Weewa in rural New South Wales.
We were.
Miley was a lively and affectionate girl and lived with her parents and two younger siblings on a rural property. The Maxwells had family friends nearby who also lived on a large property. These family friends had a 13-year-old daughter, Jay, who Miley was friends with.
But Miley was 6, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so despite the age gap, they had quite a good friendship. Yeah. On Saturday, the 4th of March 2017, Jay and her family went out to dinner for her birthday, and they were joined by 3 other 13-year-old girls and Miley. Miley's mum allowed her to stay the night at Jay's house after they went out for dinner. The next morning, the girls asked Jay's father if they could ride the 2 adult-sized quad bikes the family owned, but he said no. They then went and asked Jay's mother, who eventually said yes.
The number of times you did that as a kid, though.
I don't
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
one
Dad
parent
said
said no, so you just go and ask the other one and hope for the best.
yeah, pretty much. They were only allowed to go as far as an adjoining property, and Miley was only allowed to ride with Jay, who they knew had quad bike experience.
But still was only 13 years old.
Yes,
But did that actually happen, or did they break some rules?
they did, yes.
Okay.
None of the children wore a helmet for this ride, and the family didn't actually usually wear helmets when they were using the quad bikes, only when they were riding the motorbikes that they also owned.
This is the logic I have a lot of trouble with of people thinking that there's such a significant difference between the two.
Yeah. Jay's mother had told Jay to make sure that Miley wore a helmet, but the only 2 helmets the family owned were adult-sized, and so as part of the inquest she admitted that even if Miley had been wearing a helmet, it wouldn't have been suitable for her.
Yeah, so it wouldn't have
6-year-old
been
head.
particularly helpful in terms of that protection because
No.
it probably would have just flown off or would have been too mobile
Yeah.
on her head. Okay.
So when the girls left the home, 2 of the girls and one of the family's dogs were on one quad bike.
Yes.
Dog just came along for the ride. And Jay, Miley, and the other friend were on the second quad bike. So Jay was the driver, then the friend was behind her, and Miley was in front. Holding onto
front?
the middle part of the handlebars.
I thought Miley was going to be a sandwich. All right.
No, she's in front of Jay. So, like, Jay's
Looking over her
got
to
her
get.
arms sort
Yeah.
of around her, I guess.
Yeah.
But she's in front of her. Jay had been riding quad bikes and dirt bikes since she was young and had been allowed to ride the family's adult quad bikes for the previous 2 to 3 years.
So was that 10, from the age of 10-ish?
Yeah. She was
She was
riding the
allowed
family's
it, not 6.
adult.
Yeah.
And I assume with her parents around at the start.
I would hope so.
When she's 10, yeah. But the friend operating the other quad bike said that she knew how to ride them, which Jay's mother took to mean adult-sized ones. But in the inquest, they found... So the girl's mother actually said she was only taught to ride a small quad bike, so a child's quad bike.
So not an adult quad bike. Okay.
Yeah.
But how much is the kid meant to know around that as well? But if you're 13...
But also, like, as a kid, you put yourself in their shoes, and they're like, yeah, I know how... Like, you just,
I've ridden one.
I've done one.
Yeah.
Like, even if you haven't really, you sort of like, I know what I'm doing. Like,
absolutely.
I don't want to miss out on the fun.
Yeah. So information about the girls' journey came from police statements made by the girls, although they weren't interviewed as part of the inquest, and mobile phone footage captured by one of the girls at various points along their journey, unfortunately including the time of the accident.
That is...
Horrible, but
horrible.
also helpful.
Yeah,
true.
for them to
true.
look up.
And sorry, what year was this again?
2017.
Okay, so reasonable quality.
Yeah. The footage showed that the way the girls were riding the quad bikes was not safe, in that they were accelerating at speed and travelling close together, so there was a risk of them colliding with each other.
Oh.
Because they weren't sort of going two abreast on the tracks that they were on.
Which are probably designed for singles.
For singles,
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So the terrain on the... Like, even if they were following this, like, single-wheel track, then the other set of wheels is on the outside of the terrain, which may not necessarily be particularly stable or flat, etc.
Yeah. So after leaving the house, the girls rode around some of the paddocks and then went to another property to visit Jay's cousin, which was about 3.5 to 5 kilometres away. When they were heading back home, Miley switched quad bikes and sat in front of the other driver, with the other girl still on the back.
Yep.
At about 12:15pm, they were going along a dirt track which curved to the left towards a fence and a gate.
Hey, wait. Sorry, coming back. The other girl at the back. So Miley was in control of the vehicle, or
no? She was in front,
but
like she had been with Jay's quad bike. Just
Sorry.
switched from one to the other.
Yep.
So Jay was leading, and she stopped to let her passenger get off and open the gate for them to be able to go through. She heard a loud bang and turned around to see the other quad bike off to the right of the track, up against a large tree. The quad bike had failed to make the turn, instead travelling straight ahead into the scrub and hit a tree, causing all three girls to fall off. Both the driver of the quad bike and Miley sustained injuries in the accident. The driver suffered a skull fracture and was airlifted to hospital for treatment.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so serious accident. Miley was bleeding heavily from extensive head trauma and was unfortunately unable to be revived, despite the best efforts of Jay's parents and the attending paramedics.
And how far away were they from a, like... Does it go into, like, they were on bikes and they could get there within however long, or, like...
It didn't really go into that too much. I know that after the accident, Jay called her parents immediately, and her parents came to the site of the accident, picked up Miley, put her in the car, took her back to the house, and were working on her at the house, and that's where the paramedics got to.
Okay.
Yep. So a definitive cause for the crash couldn't be found, but may have been due to a couple of factors. So an inability to steer the quad bike because there were passengers in front of and behind the driver.
Yep.
So you're limited in your sort of manoeuvrability because you're kind of stuck.
And sometimes you can stand up and kind of lean the quad bike if you really need to get to a tight angle, which you wouldn't have been able to do with the three of them on there.
Yeah. The driver not having enough physical strength to steer because there was no power steering, and the inquest sort of talked about the fact that when you're riding a quad bike, it is quite a physical thing to do. You do need to stand up or lean, and being 13, you're not necessarily going to have the strength to be able to do that to the best of your
on an
ability.
adult bike.
Yeah. The driver not being familiar with the terrain, which is the other girl who was driving the quad bike, that wasn't her property. She hadn't necessarily ridden there before.
Yep.
And if the driver was panicking, then she may have actually gripped onto the handlebar, which squeezed the throttle even more and like actually caused the quad bike to accelerate straight ahead.
Yeah.
Because potentially she was having issues with navigating the turn, and then because of that, stressed, grabbed on, and then just accelerated.
Right. I mean, I've totally done that with, like...
I've done that on a motorbike before.
Yeah. That to me, I'm like, all of a sudden being like, oh yeah, that very much would be very easy to do. I've definitely done that before.
Yeah. And especially as a 13-year-old as well.
Yeah.
So the two quad bikes had multiple safety warning labels on them, including warnings to not operate if under the age of 16, to always wear a helmet, and to not use the quad bike with a passenger.
Oh, okay.
So
I honestly, wasn't aware that you shouldn't be riding a quad bike with a passenger.
Yeah, so there's some that can be built to have
Passengers.
and some that
others.
aren't. So they have a separate seat for them so that you're not like crammed onto the one seat.
Yeah, right, okay. That makes...
Yeah,
Logic-
one
logical
of mine's a 2-seater bike.
Yeah, okay.
So at the inquest, Jay's parents stated that they had not ever actually read the warning labels on the quad bikes. They were just used to getting on them and riding them.
Yeah,
I think that is probably true of a lot of household items.
I think so.
Yeah.
Or farm items.
Yeah, definitely. Jay's parents were also aware that the girls would be using the adult quad bikes despite being children, would not be wearing helmets, and would be carrying passengers. So they were aware that all of those were going to be happening. But the coroner stressed that the purpose of the inquest was not to blame Jay's parents or any of the children involved, but just to highlight the fact that parents continued to allow children to ride these quad bikes, even though there have been heaps of awareness campaigns and warning labels. It's still happening.
It's a culture thing, I think. Like, I would assume, I don't live in rural anywhere, but I imagine it would be such a culture thing that if you're all out there, you all live on farms, you all got quad bikes, all the kids know how to ride them, that would have been such a hard task. Because you even saw they already went to the father and he said no and the mother said yes. Like, it would be such a hard task to put your foot down and say no. And I also think there's a small risk at the age of 13 that they would have just done it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to say that these aren't good children. I'm just saying that at that age is where you start testing those bounds. And so they know where the keys are. They know how to set them up. They know how to use them. So there's still a small risk that in a group like that,
Yeah.
they're still going to end up on them.
Because the quad bikes were being ridden on private land, there were no road laws to prevent the children from riding them with passengers and without helmets.
Yeah.
Because they're on private property, they can do essentially whatever they want.
Regulation or laws from that perspective isn't going to change that outcome anyway.
No.
So there have been recommendations made during previous inquests into deaths involving quad bikes about laws relating to mandating helmets and training and stopping children under 16 from riding adult quad bikes. Unfortunately, these recommendations have not been implemented in New South Wales because of the issue of not being able to enforce them on private property.
So New South Wales has taken the stand that we can't enforce this on private property, so we're just, like,
We can't.
education campaign but no regulation or no formal... Okay. Yep.
Yeah, so if the laws were actually enacted, there would need to be supporting legislation to allow police to enter private property to investigate and enforce the laws without a warrant.
Right.
Again, and these been like really rural properties. Like,
Yeah.
I just...
Yeah,
Yeah.
And if you allow in the legislation for police to do that for these laws, well, what else can they do
Exactly.
Yeah,
that for?
it's
And you then end up
slippery slope of, if you go this step.
It's the whole privacy issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A suggestion was made that the laws could be enforced by Safe Work New South Wales through the Work Health and Safety Act due to the quad bikes being used on farms.
Yeah.
So in a working environment.
Yeah, but what if you then purchase a personal quad bike, not
Yeah,
for
well-
farm work?
Yeah, basically Safe Work then said, well, they sort of advised that they don't have the jurisdiction to do that where the matter doesn't have a connection to work health and safety.
Yeah, which
so
this didn't.
presumably because quad bikes are being used in a recreational setting,
Yeah.
not always if for farm work
Yeah.
or that sort of thing.
They could enforce it if it was an accident that happened while someone was completing a work task such as Willem,
Yeah.
but they couldn't enforce it in this place.
In this case, no.
So 3 of the coroner's recommendations in this particular case were for consideration to be given by the New South Wales Attorney General to introduce legislation for creating criminal offences for adults who allow children under 16 to ride adult quad bikes.
That's really harsh.
Yeah. And to ride any quad bike without a helmet, and requiring mandatory licensing of all persons using an adult quad bike.
I don't know, I find that tough because who do you convict or, potentially have a criminal charge against, the mum or the dad? Like, because ultimately the dad said no, but it sounds like he still knew that they were therefore out on the quad bikes at some point. So is that being complicit and therefore still worth a charge? But then the other one is, well, but the other teenager said she still knew how to ride a quad bike. And so, yes, we think it was a small quad bike, a child-sized quad bike, but had those parents ever allowed her to ride an adult one? Yeah. Does that mean that because you now have that knowledge, you now need to charge them as well? Like, it snowballs, and again, it becomes really hard to regulate. Nor do I think that that is the right...
I just don't think it's
outcome.
going to stop any. I just don't.
No.
Yeah, like,
just
is
don't think
punishing these parents that have had a 6-year-old die on their property through an accident that was absolutely tragic, that we need more education around, is punishing them criminally actually of a significant benefit to
I don't think it's
anyone?
going to deter anyone from doing the same
Yeah.
sort of thing again. Like,
Because it's all private property. You just,
yeah, this kind of circumstance is the only way that anyone's going to find out. And honestly, haven't they been punished enough?
yeah.
Yes.
So they're,
yeah,
like,
exactly.
they're never going to do this again.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. And they didn't set out with any kind of malice.
No,
So the fourth recommendation was around amending legislation to allow police to enter private property to investigate these specific offences, which we've already touched on.
Not offences if that legislation doesn't start first. So.
Yeah. The final recommendation was for a working group to be formed involving the government, Safe Work New South Wales Police and industry groups to consider requirements around the use of adult quad bikes, how could they could be enforced, and education campaigns, which sounds like that's more of a reasonable recommendation to make. And I think for this one, the coroner was just, I guess, upset by the fact that there had already been a lot of education and awareness campaigns, and yet it still hadn't had any effect on this
yeah.
case.
Yeah.
It still didn't stop this from happening. I think they did see there's been so many of these inquests into quad bikes that they were just like, clearly what we're doing isn't working. Maybe we need to try something.
I 100% agree with that. Like, mine came from 2011 and had fairly similar recommendations.
Yeah.
And then yours is now in 2017. And yes, different jurisdictions, but again, fairly similar recommendations. And so it sounds like even though these recommendations are being made, there doesn't seem to be a significant difference or change in practice still.
Yeah.
And when I think about it now, I still think that there is still potentially some of that culture around either way. Like, there are still people riding them without helmets, that there are still people riding them recreationally in an unsafe manner. I'm not convinced that the problem has been 100% solved.
Yeah. And like I've ridden one before on a farm, wore a helmet, but we did have two people on a quad bike.
You don't know if it was single or double?
I think it was a single one.
Yeah, right.
Because it wasn't particularly comfortable. Like, I don't think it had two seats. And again, like, none of us had really ridden quad bikes before, but we were over 16. We were wearing helmets. So, yeah, some of that, you could have some things in place, but not others. And even if you had everything in place, you could still have an adult who's wearing a helmet, who's experienced.
And then tip off
and it's
anyway.
still,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes, that's a sad one.
6 is so young.
It's
Yeah.
too young. It's just... And the 13-year-olds
True.
were also
Yeah, she got...
badly injured.
Yeah. Terrible.
But, yeah, just highlights that unsafe for children as well as unsafe for adults. And
And I think, like, we talk about the quad bike weighing however much they do as well.
And, like, I think in this case that, you know, it's not that the quad bike tipped over or rolled at all.
True, they just crashed and
It
got...
stayed on its wheels. The issue was with just the fact that they fell off.
Yeah.
At a speed,
Yeah.
on
And they weren't
terrain.
wearing helmets, therefore head trauma.
I mean, so technically the same thing could have happened if they're on a motorbike
Yeah,
or
definitely.
even a push bike.
Yeah, for sure.
But they wouldn't have been on a motorbike without a helmet.
That is true.
Because the family would have made them
And
wear a
they
helmet for the motorbike.
I doubt they would have been on a motorbike with 3 of them on it. Maybe 2.
And you might have a
at
better steering
stretch,
capacity
but-
on a motorbike.
So I am breaking the rules a little bit with this one, slightly, because it is quite interesting just in terms of context. Rather than being a strict quad bike, I think it's technically a quad buggy
Oh, yeah.
in that...
Does that just mean it had a roll cage?
It did not, but it was meant to. In fact, there's photos of it
Ooh.
in the report.
Yeah, mine didn't have any photos.
So it's not your typical...
Oh,
It's a two-seater quad buggy with
So
a little
like a-
tray on the back.
A cross between a golf cart
Yeah.
and a
Look, I'll forgive
ute.
But it's an interesting story, and I was like, it's, you know, I
Yeah.
could just do another quad bike where it's just a rollover or whatever, but I assumed that would be covered in some shape or form. So yeah, this one's just a little bit different in terms of the context of where the incident occurred,
Yes, true.
which we'll get into now. So Benjamin, or Benny Watts, as he was more commonly called, was 31 years old at the time of his death, which occurred in the Darwin Correctional Centre in the Northern Territory in the year 2020. So this is a recent one. I think the coronial inquest report only just got released earlier this year.
Okay.
So Benny was described by his family as being a fun-loving adventurer who liked to push the limits. He'd come to the attention of police on a number of occasions in his youth. The first time he was 16 and he stole a golf buggy and, ironically, a quad bike.
At the same time?
Yeah, with him and a co-accused.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they stole a golf buggy and a quad bike. Then when he was 18, he and a co-offender again stole a marmoset monkey and a saltwater crocodile from Crocodiles Park in Darwin. I'm not sure how.
Why?
Look.
Yeah, also how? Was it a adult?
Mine's more it doesn't talk
Adult
about
crocodile?
the doesn't
No.
talk about the specifics of the crocodile, but
I
thought
assume
that
a
was,
baby crocodile. Because how are you
I don't know how
wrangling
you'd
an
steal
adult crocodile?
an adult crocodile, but I wouldn't want to be stealing a crocodile at all. I don't know what happened to the saltwater crocodile or the marmoset monkey after the theft, but
Hopefully they were okay and returned.
I hope so, but that was one of the crimes that he was found
It's
to
an
have
odd
committed.
selection of crimes that he has committed. He doesn't have a theme, does he?
No, he doesn't. However, the next year when he was 19, he was in the vicinity of a man who was threatening to blow up a petrol station, and Benny tackled this man to the ground and held him until police arrived. So these heroics earned him a front-page headline on the NT newspaper, which read, "From villain to hero, plot to blow up servo foiled by monkey thief."
That's an excellent headline.
No, I love that this is in the report as well.
And I love that the journalist decided to go with monkey thief and not crocodile thief.
Or thief in general, because he stole a bunch of other
Yeah,
things
true.
as well.
Yeah. Monkey thief's
Focus
got
on
a
the
nice
monkey.
tone to it, though.
Yeah.
A nice ring to it.
Weird.
But as an adult, Benny worked in the mines and did earth moving, often driving heavy machinery. Unfortunately, sometime in his adulthood, he became involved with drugs. On the 16th of June 2015, he was sentenced to 8 months prison for drugs and firearm offences. He was released, but then on the 9th of February 2016, he was charged with even more serious drugs and firearm offences, and he was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 4 years. From March 2016, Benny was employed in various roles within the prison. In March 2019, he began working in the horticulture area of the prison, which is an area of about 350 hectares at the back of the prison. These farms were accessed by dirt tracks and through scrubs. Benny showed an aptitude for his work in the prison, and he was known as being highly reliable. He was particularly adept at driving bobcats and often taught other people within the prison how to use them.
Yeah, because I guess he had that earth moving experience. Yeah.
So very, very familiar with heavy machinery. In early March 2020, Benny obtained an open security rating, meaning that he could live outside the fence of the prison, and also work in the community. So he joined a community support work party. However, in April 2020, his community work was stopped due to COVID.
Right. To then have to go back and living
Back
in the prison.
into back into the prison.
I'm sorry, how are you in prison and not in prison?
I didn't quite understand it, and I didn't look it up. I probably should have.
That's all right. Someone will tell us, I suppose, at some point.
Overcrowding?
I mean,
And then you've got
probably.
the good prisoners who you
But, like,
trust
yeah.
to...
do you not, like, go on parole versus, like, you're still a prisoner, but also, like, don't worry, we're not going to lock you up at night? Like, I'm so confused.
Yeah, me too.
Because, like,
I
you're
am as
also
well.
loss of rights, whereas, like, if you're out wandering the streets, you've not
There would have to be some sort of
regulation around it.
Curfew.
regulation
Right?
on it.
Anyway,
Yeah.
go on.
It's completely aside the point.
Yeah, I know.
But also very interesting. So Benny was eligible for parole in early 2020 as well. However, unfortunately, he wasn't released because he didn't formally released because he didn't have any employment in the community because he couldn't because of COVID, which I'm assuming would have been a real issue in that transition period for a lot of people who were trying to exit
And
prison.
a lot of
Yeah.
prisons.
Everywhere,
yeah.
all over the world. It's not something
Wow.
I would have thought of, but it looks like it was an issue.
Yeah, right.
So the parole board was due to meet again on the 27th of May 2020, and it was thought that Benny was likely to have received parole on that date. However, he unfortunately passed away on the 8th of May 2020. So there were 2 ATVs, or terrain vehicles, in use in the horticulture section of the prison. There was a Kawasaki and a Polaris. I won't go into any detail about the vehicles, but the Kawasaki was a 4-seater ATV and it was slower than the Polaris, so it had a top speed of about 45 kilometres an hour, and the Polaris was that 2-seater buggy.
The one that we looked at before.
The one that's,
Yeah, okay.
there's a picture in the report, and it had a max speed of about 60 to 70 kilometres an hour, so a faster vehicle.
The description is, it's 2 seats at the front with kind of like a section on the back that
Yeah,
you can
it's
like
kind of
store
like
stuff.
kind of like a ute. Like, tray, ute of a tray.
It's a golf bug cross ute.
Yeah. Because it's got a roof.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So on the 8th of May 2020, Benny was working in the horticultural area of the prison precinct. He signed out the Polaris at 8:45 a.m. and another prisoner signed out the other ATV shortly after. So they went out, did their work, and after completing their work for the day, they headed back to the prison around 1:30 p.m. Benny was driving the Polaris and the other prisoner was driving the Kawasaki. And I think there was another passenger in the Kawasaki as well. At that point, the Kawasaki was in the lead, and the other prisoner suggested that Benny should take the lead as he knew the area better and the Polaris was the faster vehicle. So basically, a one sort of lane track, the slower vehicle was in front, and the other one was like, can you just overtake us and show us the way back because your vehicle's faster and you know where you're going. So Benny attempted to overtake by taking a sort of slide track that ran parallel to the main track that they were on. And it rejoined the larger track a little bit further down, but it was kind of a bit grassy area. It was kind of not very well lined track.
Not used as much.
Yeah. So the Kawasaki was travelling at about 30 kilometres an hour, so the slower vehicle. And it's estimated that the Polaris was travelling at about 60 kilometres an hour, so twice the speed. And while at this speed, Benny drove the ATV into a grassed area to rejoin that track in front of the Kawasaki. But unseen and disguised in the grass was a 1 metre high dirt mound.
Oh,
the Polaris, the Polaris hit the mound and Benny and the ATV were launched into the air. Benny was not wearing a seatbelt, which is a thing that you can have with these little buggies, which is different than a quad bike. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt and he was separated from the ATV as they hit the bump.
Oh, wow.
When Benny hit the ground, he suffered an atlanto-occipital dislocation fracture. And then moments later, the Polaris landed on him as well, crushing him.
Horrendous for the people who saw that happen.
Yeah. It would have been terrible.
Can I ask in here, like, seatbelt-wise, was there regulation around whether he should have been wearing a seatbelt from... Because how does that work? Like, I guess Australia has work cover. Does this count as an employment status in a prison?
It's technically a workplace.
Yeah.
Because he is carrying out work
Yeah.
while he's in the prison.
And also a death in custody.
It is a death in custody as well.
Yeah. Was he meant to be wearing a seatbelt?
Yes and no, so we get into that a bit more.
Okay.
we'll
That's also
get
fine.
into that later.
Yeah. Cool.
So there were, as I said, there were 2 prisoners on the Kawasaki that saw everything, and they stopped the ATV and ran over to the Polaris and lifted it off Benny. Mm-hmm. One of the prisoners then drove back on the Kawasaki to the prison while the other stayed and cared for Benny. Benny was bleeding from the nose and mouth and he was unconscious. He had a pulse, but he wasn't breathing. The prisoner who stayed with him did attempt to provide mouth-to-mouth resuscitation for 5 minutes until his pulse weakened, and then he started chest compressions. A short time later, the first corrections officer arrived and took over the CPR, and about 25 minutes, the paramedics and police arrived, but unfortunately, Benny was declared deceased at the scene at about 2:18 p.m. So the autopsy revealed that Benny had extensive and non-survivable skull fractures, as well as a spinal cord dislocation. The pathologist's evidence suggested that he wasn't wearing a helmet and suggested that a helmet may have reduced the crush injuries to his skull, but would have not prevented the dislocation of his spinal cord, which in itself would have resulted in death.
And he wasn't required to be wearing a helmet?
Again, we'll get into the standard operating procedures.
Okay, fun.
Which is just the crazy part to me. So,
Okay.
the Polaris had been in use in the prison since early 2016, and it came with an owner's manual, which had a significant number of warnings, including, your general speed warnings and things like that, and, not to drive it while you're intoxicated. So the manual also stated that users should always wear a seatbelt, and it gave warnings of severe injury or death in the event of a rollover. It also stated that operators should always wear a helmet and eye protection, and that cabinets should be on the buggy and secure at all times.
To stop you from falling out?
So being ejected from the vehicle like Benny was.
Like, I get
Okay.
that that's in there as you should do this, but who's wearing a helmet while they're driving a golf buggy? No one.
And
eye protection.
and
no one.
when the nets are around, so you can't be ejected. But I suppose then your head's just slamming into the roof.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
like,
It's you're still.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen anyone drive a golf buggy with a helmet.
Yeah, but how many golf buggies go to 60k an hour?
I feel
pretty
like most of the normal, like, standard, like, actual golf
And remember,
buggies?
we say golf
No,
buggy,
okay.
but it is an all-terrain vehicle. Like,
Yeah, sorry,
it's,
it's
it's
true.
not. Yeah, it's designed to go over
yeah.
bumps and just like
Yeah.
a quad bike is.
True, I guess you're probably getting thrown off of an all-terrain vehicle more often than you're getting thrown off a golf buggy.
Yeah, you would think so.
But yeah, I guess if you're wearing a helmet on a quad bike, even if it has just because this thing has a roof doesn't make it more safe.
No.
So you
No.
should, yeah.
It just
I just
protects you
don't
from
know
the
that you would-
sun.
Stops you from getting sunburnt.
Pretty
doesn't
much.
Stop you from getting killed.
So these safety procedures, i.e. the helmet, eye protection, and the cabinets, were not followed by the prison. So there were no cabinets on the Polaris, and there were no helmets available for people to use.
Oh.
Oh,
Nothing
okay.
available.
So it wasn't a choice on his part to not wear it?
No,
It's
there
that
was
it
none
wasn't.
available for him.
And I'm interested, like, the cabinets, were they sold with the vehicle, or, like, were they an extra purchase that you're expected to get, and so the prison's just been like, nah.
Don't know. They don't go into that detail.
Yeah.
So the horticulture section had its own standard operating procedures, or SOPs, that workers were required to sign. So those SOPs did not mention seatbelts, helmets, eye protection, or cabinets at all. Full stop. Wasn't
Right,
even in their
okay.
SOPs.
Yeah.
What is, I mean, what was in them then?
Not a whole lot. It's
Please
like,
turn on and drive.
please,
Drive
it
with
was
your
more like,
hands.
don't speed. You know, those
Don't
general...
speed, but, like, I mean, they're on
Steer
a
with
private
both
property,
hands.
so, like, how fast are you going to go?
Exactly.
You can go whatever you want. There's no speed limit.
Yep.
There was
Anyway.
also a safe work method statement in relation to the operations of the ATV. It mentioned eyewear, but no seatbelts, helmets, or cabinets.
Oh, that's
So-
not ideal.
Yeah, you would think. If
Alright.
I was
Eyewear,
choo- if I was-
apparently,
If I was
is important.
choosing any one of those to include, it would be the seatbelt.
You would
People are
think so.
used to wearing seatbelts when they're driving a vehicle.
Also, if a vehicle comes with a seatbelt,
Yeah,
I
you
would have
just-
thought.
You would
Put it
think that they
on.
would use it.
Yeah.
So evidence was given that the prisoners were told to wear seatbelts. So this is evidence given by other prisoners. However, they were getting in and out of the vehicle so often that they often just didn't wear them.
Yeah, that seems fair. Like, the
Similar with helmets,
function.
right? Like,
I
I mean, not in this
less-
case. I mean, I'm thinking of the farmer.
Yeah,
Willem.
yeah, fair.
Yeah.
But, like, you probably wouldn't, even if you're just, like, chucking feed out to your animals, you're probably not taking your helmet off.
But
Just
I,
leave it on.
but yeah, I can totally see why you wouldn't bother with the seatbelt if it's like really frequent on and off.
Yeah.
That would get very
It'd get
tiring.
very annoying. On the 21st of May 2020, so a few days after Betty's death, NT WorkSafe, so this is bringing in the WorkSafe
Yeah.
aspect of it, served improvement notices requiring the SOPs to be updated in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions and recommendations, which seems pretty basic, right? And of course, in particular, in relation to the use of seatbelts, helmets, and cabinets. Makes sense. So prison authorities held a debriefing along with the other relevant services such as police, emergency services, and the ambulance service. There are a number of suggestions made about how to improve both the tracks and the response to critical incidents outside the secure prison fence. So in response to the briefing, SOPs were updated to reflect the manufacturer's warnings. Helmets were purchased and required to be worn.
Purchased. They were purchased.
They were purchased. So they're actually made available for the prisoners to use.
Wow.
The Kawasaki was speed governed to 30 kilometres an hour. Remember, it could previously go up to about 45. And the Polaris was completely decommissioned.
Oh, okay, just buy. Yeah, I mean, I suppose
Yeah.
it probably didn't have a lot going on for it after it had
No,
crashed.
killed someone.
No, and
Well,
also,
no, like
who
it
wants
might have
to
been
be-
damaged and stuff like that.
Yeah, but also who wants to be driving the vehicle that killed someone?
They also coloured the seatbelts bright orange so that they could be seen from a distance.
Oh, to tell whether or not they were wearing
Someone's
them?
wearing it or
Yeah.
not. And the vehicles will not start until the seatbelt is engaged.
Interesting.
Okay, they've
Which-
gone from 0 to
I
100.
really have with that.
Like, and it's a good thing because
Does it
clearly
turn-
it needs
like-
it, but
Yeah, but you just turn it on with the seatbelt like, in, and then you just
You can just,
disengage.
yeah, exactly. You can
Yeah.
not be actually with the over the top of
Yeah.
you. You can just, assuming that it's a
Yeah.
normal car looking seatbelt, you
Belt.
could just sit
even
on top of
yeah,
it.
with a lap belt, you can sit on top of that.
Oh, exactly. So the Department of Corrections also employed a safety and security manager who undertook a comprehensive review of the circumstances of Benny's death. The review made an additional 12 recommendations on how to improve the safety procedure and processes of the prison in relation to these ATVs. However, the coroner didn't go into any detail of what those 12 recommendations were. but noted that many of them were yet to be implemented, as implementation is subject to the approval of necessary resources, and at the time of the inquest, correction was still waiting on a decision on whether those resources would be funded.
Government red tape.
Government red tape. And also, it's that thing, it's a prison. They're prisoners. They're not really the top of our...
I know, it's such a hard part, but, like, I mean, we should still keep them alive.
Yes.
Yeah, we should still make sure we purchase helmets.
Like,
so that they can...
They're meant to have some of their rights taken away in terms of they have done criminal acts, but it doesn't mean that they have no human rights.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
And that we should still treat them like human beings that are entitled to have safe work environments.
Yeah.
And they're still, you know, in this sense, they're still contributing to society in terms of they're working, they're doing the farming, they're working in the horticulture section.
Yeah.
Like, they're working, so they should be provided with safety equipment like any other workplace.
Yeah.
And the fact
Absolutely.
that they didn't even get helmets.
Oh, yeah.
It's a worry.
Yes,
it is.
It's not even available to them. So the coroner commented that the fundamental issue in this case was that the Polaris was a fast and potentially dangerous vehicle, which was noted in the manufacturer's handbook. It was a hazard that the prison authorities introduced to the workplace without adequately addressing the risks.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah,
like, it seems like they're like, this will do the trick without really...
They're like,
Yeah.
this is great. This will keep the prisoners busy. This will help us with, you know, the function that we need to serve in terms of the horticulture stuff. But
Yeah.
didn't think it through any further than that. The coroner found that the appropriate risk assessment of the Polaris was not undertaken by the prison, so the Polaris was a hazard, a workplace hazard. In the coroner's view, the treatment and supervision of Benjamin Watts while in custody should not be criticised, but given the dangers allowed to remain in the prison workplace, the level of care provided to the prisoners was insufficient.
Yeah.
The coroner recommended that the recommendations made by the safety security manager, again, we don't actually know because they didn't go through them, be implemented as a priority and with due expedition.
Excellent.
So,
Look, yeah, that's a little bit frustrating from a recommendations perspective.
yeah,
I want to know more detail.
Yep.
what
Please.
were those additional prison recommendations? And it might be something that is more confidential and
True.
Yeah, potentially.
Like,
when you get to deaths in custody and those sorts of things, I can imagine it's not
well,
quite
even if
as
it's just
open.
like confidential prison workplace instruction, because they don't want people to know that Benny was doing work at the west side fence at 3 p.m. in the afternoon because they're worried about security from that perspective, that they say, you know, some of those recommendations could have been regarding specific duties that would
Yeah, true.
leave the prison at risk of security breach or
That's
issue.
right. And that was something that was very evident reading through this report, that it was very scant on those sorts of details.
Because it needed to be.
Because it needed to be. Like, there was no talk about, like, where he was in the prison, except for in the hell, like, you know, this big 350 hectare area. They didn't tell sort of how far away he was from the secure fare. They didn't go into
Right.
any of that detail.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Just that
Fair.
it was a scrubbed area.
I really haven't read many death in custody.
No, neither do
inquests.
I. I haven't either, just purely because generally they're not really relevant to our podcast. But
Yeah.
this one, as soon as I saw ATV accident,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, in prison?
Yeah, that's more interesting.
That's interesting.
I forget that just like in the general population, accidents happen in other populations such as prisoners. So yeah.
I think the key themes here are helmets.
Helmets seem
And
to be...
safety, like just general safety concern around what is a fast machine that's unstable in terms of its potential to roll over.
Yep.
That you need to respect that.
Yeah, and follow the instructions that are given in those owner manuals.
Yeah.
That
Because
they,
clearly none of them were.
no.
And I mean, in the prisoners' respect, it wasn't their fault. And in terms of, this is going a bit off track, but in terms of with prisoners, don't they like give away all their sort of consent as well? Like,
I like that.
it's like, I bet you if
Yeah.
the prisoners were concerned that, hey, there's no helmets, I don't want to ride this, they would have just lost their privileges.
Yeah,
So
but
they're going
for
to
me-
do
not
that
gonna
work.
work,
They were
yeah.
like, fine, you just won't work.
Yeah, I really struggle with that of like how much right did they have to question the safety of the work that they were doing.
Probably
And
none.
I want to be optimistic and I want to say that they may have had a right to say something, but my pessimism is worried that they didn't.
Yeah, and they were like, this is a great job that I get, like in terms of prison work. Like it's probably lots
Yeah.
of freedom. They're like, I don't want to.
Yeah, if they rock the boat, they lose that freedom.
They would
So
lose
is
the
it-
freedom. So,
So there's that power play as well.
As well, right? Like they are getting paid
I think
It's very
goes
low
to,
pay
badly,
though,
but they are getting
I think it
paid
goes
an
to, like,
amount. But that would still be a privilege that
a
other
massive
people wouldn't
privilege.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. They may not want to give up that
And they're
right
allowed
because then
to
they get a
go-
shitty job in,
The kitchen.
or the the
I love
cleaning.
that that's the first place that we both went to.
Yeah, kitchen. But
I
like,
was thinking the janitorial work is worse, but sure.
Yeah.
but also like they're allowed outside of the secure prison fence.
Yeah.
Like that's probably
And they get to be outside.
outside, yeah, driving a buggy, like
And that's
pretty
if
cool.
if that's his skill as well. He potentially
Yeah.
doesn't want to be doing something he doesn't have a skill in. Like,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, right.
That's right.
Shitty.
but interesting.
Very interesting.
And I think, yeah, definitely some common themes here, even though the background story is very, very different.
Yeah.
You got a very experienced to inexperienced to just unsuitable option,
Yep.
and how
They can
dangerous they can be.
all have the same end result.
Yeah. Sadly.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Thanks
Thank you.
everyone for listening in.
And we'll see you again next time.
Will do.
Bye.
Bye.